I asked Mr. Stutzman to lead that hymn because when I was in preschool, my teacher, Mrs. Sousa, asked if anyone in the class had something they wanted to share. I think she probably meant something to share for show and tell, but I'm told I stood up and sang all 4 verses of that song for my class. I'm hoping to have some small portion of that 4-year-old's courage this morning. I'm going to tell 3 stories from my youth, but I wanted to begin with the words of Jesus. Matthew 6, 5 through 8. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray for your Father, who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. When I was 9, I hit my little sister in the eye with a dart. It was late afternoon on a school day, and we were playing out in the yard in front of our house. Like all siblings do, we often made up games to occupy ourselves while Mom and Dad were doing whatever parents do while kids occupy themselves. This particular game involved one of us throwing a frisbee on the ground and the other one trying to throw a handful of darts beyond it. We were just finishing up our game, getting ready to go inside for dinner. Julie, who was 6, had just thrown the frisbee, and I was about to empty my hand of darts. I have a vivid slow-motion memory of my arm swinging forward as hard as my 9-year-old body could muster, just as Julie walked across the flight path of my dart. I saw it strike her in the face, heard her scream, and watched in horror as she fell to the ground, her hand to her head. I ran up the 4 or 5 steps of our front porch, burst through the front door, and screamed, "Mom, Dad, I hit Julie with a dart." These weren't Nerf darts or kids' toys you can buy at Walmart. This is the actual tip of the dart that I threw that day. These darts have a 1-inch long steel tip, designed for sinking into the dense cork of a dartboard. We'd been playing this game for a while that evening, so these darts had also just been stuck in the ground. Now one was stuck in my sister's head as far in as it could go, an inch deep. I remember my mom and Dad both running out of the house. Dad's initial instinct was to pull out the dart. Mom was an ER nurse and knew it would be better to wait until Julie could get to the hospital. Dad called Steve, a friend of ours who was an ER doctor and lived just down the street. Then he called 911. The emergency dispatcher, Patty, was also a good friend, which was good because Dad was so distraught that he couldn't think of our home address. Patty knew where we lived and dispatched the ambulance to our house. When Steve got there a couple of minutes later, he carefully unscrewed the shaft of the dart from its tip and secured the tip in place with surgical tape. While we waited for the ambulance to arrive, he contacted the ophthalmologist on call to make sure someone would be ready for when Julie arrived in the ER. This was the first time I remember seeing my father cry. I sat down next to Mom and said, "We need to pray." She was also distraught and asked me to pray. Though I don't remember for sure what I said, I'm told I simply prayed, "Dear God, please don't let Julie be blind." The ambulance arrived and Julie was strapped to a board and her head and neck were braced. Julie was calm on the way to the hospital, almost to the point of falling asleep. The next slide is a photo of my sister taken in the hospital before the dart was removed. Though it's not overly graphic, if you're a little squeamish, you might find it disturbing. Julie was recovering from chicken pox, which is why she has spots on her face. The arrow is pointing to the tip of the dart, which can be seen resting against my sister's eyeball. The tip of the dart pierced the skin just beside her eyebrow and next to her temple. It missed the bones, muscles, and nerves surrounding her eye and came to a rest against her eyeball without scratching it. You can go to the next slide, which is blank. The ophthalmologist who removed the dart said if he had surgically placed it, he couldn't have done a better job to minimize damage. It was thrown by a 9-year-old boy from at least 20 feet away. Julie hasn't experienced any physical effects from that incident. No infection from the dirty dart, no vision issues, not even a scar. I believe in miracles. Not just the ones we read about in the Bible, but the ones that happen today. I know there are coincidences, things that can be explained away. But when I have doubts about the existence of God, I think about this experience, among others, and I'm reminded that He is in control. Fast forward 7 years, I was 16. Looking back now as a 41-year-old, I admit that I drove like a maniac at that age. If you drive fast or aggressively, I hope you live to be 41 and can look back and admit the same thing. It's a miracle that I'm alive today. I'll tell you what my dad told me many times when I was a teen driver: slow is cool. It's true. This is the area on Route 42, about 3 miles north of town, where this story takes place. So I'm 16. I'm on my way home from youth group at Lindale Mennonite Church. My sister was in the front seat. My poor sister. It had just rained, so Route 42 was wet. For some reason, my teenage brain thought it would be a good idea for me and my '87 Honda Accord hatchback to race my friend Mike, who was in his supercharged Dodge Charger, which dramatically overpowered my car. Of course, he quickly blew my doors off, but I still had to try to at least keep up with him. But up ahead, I saw a minivan that looked kind of like my parents', so I decided to slow down before I blew past it. I glanced down at my speedometer as I gently applied the brakes and saw that I was doing around 90. At that speed on a wet roadway, navigating a gentle curve, when I started braking, my car immediately fishtailed and I lost control. I don't know for sure what happened next, but I know that the car was spinning. It all happened so fast. The car somehow came to a stop across both oncoming lanes, having crossed the raised median and stalled. Julie was crying and trembling. I was trembling too, but quickly restarted the engine and drove to where I could make a U-turn and continue home. I went from 90 miles an hour to out of control to stopped in a matter of seconds. I don't know how my car came to a stop so quickly. I should have crossed both lanes of traffic and hit the guardrail or gone down over the embankment on the other side of the road. I could have been hit by oncoming traffic. I could have rolled the car when it hit the raised median. I could have killed my sister or been killed myself. I'm not proud of the fact that this is not the only time I drove like that. The turning point in my teen years driving in my teen years was when I was ticketed with reckless driving for going 86 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. It was my senior year and I was 17. I was on Route 42 in Amherst County, driving a minivan full of my friends on the way down to Lynchburg College to watch our guys play in the VIC championship game, which we won that year. That was back when there wasn't a limit on how many passengers a driver under 18 could have in the vehicle. I had 6 passengers with me, in addition to myself. I was driving with a caravan of 4 or 5 vehicles full of EMHS students going on to cheer on our guys' basketball team. We were all driving like maniacs, and I happened to be the last one in line as we passed through radar. That was the first time I'd ever been stopped. The state trooper saw me before I saw him, which is always the case. And by the time I could even start applying the brakes, I was already past him. After he caught up and pulled me over, he had me come back and sit in his police cruiser while he wrote my ticket. I told him that I was traveling with several other vehicles and asked if he had clocked them as well. He said yes, but that I was going the fastest and that I was the last one in line, so I was the one that got pulled over today. He asked if I thought the other vehicles had stopped to wait for me, and I said I doubt it, and they hadn't. He asked me where we were going, and I told him. He told me that he could take me to jail then and there and impound the vehicle, but that he would just write a ticket since this was my first offense and I had passengers in the vehicle with me. It was a quiet ride the rest of the way to Lynchburg. As soon as we got there, I found a payphone, this was before cell phones, and called my dad to tell him exactly what had happened. I don't remember the thought process that I had that led me to the conclusion that I should call him, but I'm so glad that I did. I also don't remember what was said during that conversation. Of course, he was furious with me for good reason. I had violated his trust. I had put myself, my friends, and others on the road in serious danger. When I walked into the gym, I found that my friends had taken up a collection to help me pay for the ticket. After driving home at exactly the speed limit, I faced my father, and probably my mother too, I don't remember for sure, who had had some time to cool off and collect their thoughts by then. Dad took my license until we went before the judge. I heard from a number of my friends that they were no longer allowed to ride with me anymore. I remember apologizing to my girlfriend's parents for my reckless actions. It was a humbling period of time. Several weeks later, my dad and I had to travel back to Amherst County to juvenile court to see the judge. Thankfully, as a minor, I didn't have to go to the general district traffic court. It was a private proceeding, just the judge, the police officer who had ticketed me, my father, and me. The judge asked the officer to relay his notes regarding the ticket, and then asked my father if we had an attorney. Dad said no. Why? Do we need one? The judge advised my father that if he found me guilty, he could sentence me with a $2,500 fine and up to a year in a juvenile correctional facility. I remember sitting up rigid, putting my hands on the table and breathing, whoa. The judge got the reaction that he wanted. Dad and I were given a couple of minutes to talk privately. Dad said he didn't think the judge was going to give me that harsh a sentence and that we should just face the music. With some anxiety, I agreed, and we went back before the judge. He asked me if I had anything I wanted to say. I said no. Dad asked if he could say something on my behalf. He told the judge that as soon as I was able, I had called him and told him the truth, and that he had taken my license as soon as I arrived at home. Dad gave my license to the judge then and told him that it was up to him to decide what happened with my driving privileges. The judge considered for a bit, then told me that I'm lucky to have parents who make me take responsibility for my actions. He said that he often sees parents who make excuses for their kids, blame others for their irresponsible actions, and don't hold them accountable. He said, I'll give you a choice. I can reduce your charge to improper driving, which would be placed on your permanent driving record, or I can put you on 1-year probation. Within that year, if you receive any moving violation, I will enforce the charge of reckless driving. Or if you don't receive any moving violations and you pass a defensive driving class, in 1 year come back and I'll reduce the charge further. I chose probation, passed the defensive driving class, and drove like a saint for the next year. When we went back to see the judge, he dismissed all the charges, and we didn't even have to pay court costs. His plan had worked. In that year, I broke the bad habits and formed new habits of safer driving. I totally believe that the prayers of my parents, protective angels, and the creativity of that judge kept me alive despite my irresponsible actions during that period of my life. I consider this another miracle. I believe that God puts certain people in our lives for a reason, and I know that prayer has power. Would Julie be blind if I hadn't prayed that prayer when I was 9 years old? Would I be alive if my parents didn't pray for me regularly while I was a novice driver? Would I have continued on my destructive path of reckless driving if that judge hadn't given me a chance to improve my irresponsible habits? I can't answer those questions. But I know that God listens to our prayers and answers them, not always in the way that we desire. And I can't say that I understand why that is, but I believe God hears us. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells us that God knows what we need even before we ask it. Yet we're still instructed to pray. Simple prayers are all that's needed. God doesn't need overly eloquent, babbling prayers with lots of words. Just, dear God, don't let Julie be blind. Or a quickly whispered prayer by my mother as I walk out the door, Lord, please keep him safe as he drives this evening. Prayer is powerful and effective, and God still performs miracles. You're dismissed.